They woke up expecting another cold day of hard labor, washing uniforms, peeling potatoes, and counting the hours behind barbed wire. But that morning the guards gathered the women and said 5 words no one expected. "No work today. It's Christmas." What happened next made even hardened prisoners break down in tears. The wind cut through the camp like a blade. It was December 25th, 1944. Somewhere in the American Midwest, cold, gray, and quiet, except for the crunch of boots on frozen dirt. Inside the low wooden barracks, rows of women stirred from their bunks, rubbing frost from their breath. Most were in their 20s or 30s, former nurses, clerks, and auxiliaries once stationed in Europe. Now they were prisoners, disarmed, displaced, and thousands of miles from home. They woke expecting another day of labor. Every morning since their arrival, the routine had been the same. Line up at dawn, receive black coffee and bread, then march to the laundry sheds or the canning warehouse. Their hands were raw from soap and cold water, their faces pale from weeks without sunlight. The Americans weren't cruel, but discipline was strict. Every mistake earned extra shifts. No one complained aloud. Complaints didn't change orders. That morning, however, something felt different. The guards moved slower, quieter. One of them, a young corporal from Kansas, carried no clipboard. Instead, he held a paper in one hand and looked almost nervous. "Line up," he called, but his tone wasn't harsh. The women exchanged looks, unsure what was happening. They gathered outside, breath fogging in the air, waiting for the next command. An interpreter, a German-American sergeant named Lewis, stepped forward. His accent was heavy but kind. He unfolded the paper and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "There will be no work today," he said. "It's Christmas." For a moment, silence, not a sound. The women stood frozen, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Then a few began whispering, "Keine Arbeit, no work." They looked to the guards, expecting clarification, maybe a cruel joke, but it wasn't. The guards simply nodded, some smiling faintly. One of the women, a nurse named Anesa, whispered to her friend, "They can't mean it. There's always work." Her friend Gerda shrugged, eyes narrowing. Maybe something happened at headquarters, but nothing had. Orders had come down the day before from the camp commandant himself. All non-essential labor would stop for 24 hours. Under the Geneva Convention, prisoners of war were entitled to rest on Sundays and holidays, and Christmas, especially for the Germans, was to be respected. The Americans had decided to go further. Not only a day off, but a proper holiday meal. Inside the mess hall, the smell of roasted turkey drifted through the air. The cooks, mostly U.S. Army personnel with help from prisoner volunteers, had been up since dawn preparing food. Real butter, bread, potatoes, even sugar. Luxuries none of the German women had seen since before the war. Back in the barracks, disbelief began to fade into cautious excitement. Annalisa looked around and whispered, "Do you think they'll let us eat with them? Don't be foolish." Goethe replied, but her voice softened. "Maybe they just want to remind us what we lost." When the lunch bell rang, the prisoners filed toward the hole under light guard. The sky had brightened slightly, snow beginning to fall in lazy spirals. For a brief moment, the rows of barbed wire looked almost like garlands. Inside, long tables were covered with paper tablecloths. There were candles, real ones, and a small pine tree at the front of the room, cut from the edge of the camp property. The women stopped at the entrance, staring. Some smiled for the first time in months. Others blinked hard, trying not to cry. A guard held the door open. "Merry Christmas," he said softly as they entered. The interpreter explained that the camp chaplain would read a short prayer followed by a shared meal. There would be music later. One of the guards had brought an accordion. Annalisa sat at a table near the front, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up a fork. She couldn't remember the last time she'd used one made of metal instead of tin. Across from her sat a guard about her age, a farm boy from Nebraska. He offered her coffee and smiled shyly. "You speak English?" He asked only little, she replied, hesitant. He nodded, then gestured toward the food. Turkey, he said, real turkey, and Alyssa looked down at her plate. Thick slices of meat, mashed potatoes, peas, and gravy. The sight alone was overwhelming. When the first bite reached her tongue, she closed her eyes. The warmth filled her chest like fire spreading through ice. All around the room, the same quiet miracle unfolded. Women who had endured bombings, evacuations, and capture now sat under an American flag, eating like human beings again. For a brief moment, the war outside seemed far away, but something even more powerful was about to happen. Because when the music started, the walls between them, the guards, and the prisoners began to fall. By the time the first notes of Silent Night drifted through the mess hall, a strange calm had settled over the camp. The accordion sounded slightly out of tune, but no one cared. A few of the American guards hummed quietly, unsure if they should join in. Across the tables, German voices began to rise, hesitant at first, then full, trembling with emotion. Even those who didn't sing felt the weight of the moment. For months, life in the camp had followed a rigid rhythm. Most of the German women had been shipped to the United States after the Allied advance through France. They were clerks, medical aides, or communication staff captured near Normandy and Belgium. Transported across the Atlantic in Liberty ships, they arrived in ports like Boston or New York, then sent inland by train to camps spread across America's heartland, places like Fort Deans in Massachusetts, Camp Swift in Texas, and Camp Atterbury in Indiana. The camp this story centers on stood outside a small Midwestern town, surrounded by flat fields, silos, and the steady wind of winter. Their days began before sunrise. They cleaned, laundered uniforms, sewed patches, and helped process canned goods for the army. Work was supervised but not brutal. Pay came in the form of tokens redeemable at the camp store, where they could buy toiletries, stationery, or an occasional chocolate bar. The women often wrote home letters strictly censored, but still precious. Annalise had sent one every 2 weeks since her capture, never sure if any reached her mother near Munich. Each letter ended with the same line, "I am alive, and I am treated fairly." That was true, at least by the standards of war. The American guards treated them firmly, but without hatred. Some of the younger soldiers, barely older than the prisoners, seemed almost embarrassed by their role. Many of them had sisters back home. They saw that these women could have been their sisters, too. One sergeant named Miller had once brought an old magazine to the work area, a life issue filled with photos of Christmas in New York. The women had stared at the pictures, children gazing at store windows, couples skating in Rockefeller Center, rows of lights down Fifth Avenue. One of them whispered, "They live like that during war." Miller had just shrugged. "That's America," he said simply. Still, kindness didn't erase captivity. The barbed wire and watchtowers were constant reminders of their place. At night, the women lay in their bunks, listening to the faraway whistle of freight trains and the crackle of guards' radios. Some cried softly. Others stared at the ceiling, remembering faces they might never see again. Yet, as the weeks passed, something subtle shifted. The Americans learned that discipline and dignity could coexist. The prisoners learned that compassion could survive even under the shadow of war. Inside the camp, work details became more relaxed. There were brief exchanges of words, sometimes laughter. When one of the women fell ill, the camp infirmary treated her promptly. When a parcel arrived from the Red Cross, guards distributed it personally. The line between enemy and human blurred in small, invisible steps. But outside the camp fences, many Americans had mixed feelings. Rumors spread through nearby towns. The government's feeding Germans while our boys are fighting. Yet others, especially farmers who employed P labor, saw things differently. The Germans worked hard, complained little, and sometimes left behind letters of thanks when they were transferred. A local farmer once said,